So today we're talking about chemotherapy. And in order for me to really dive into that, I need to start with the single mastectomy that I had. Out of that surgery came something called a pathology report. The details of the pathology report, I'm not really going to get into. The Cliff's Notes version is, I'm under 40, premenopausal, I have a hormone-driven cancer, and I also have lymph node involvement. So taking those details and many others within that pathology report really helped the doctors put together a plan for me, essentially, of what treatment and therapy can look like. First up being chemotherapy. So the important thing to note is that number one, this is a recommendation. So the doctor's going to recommend this. You can opt to elect to do it, or you might not. The reason why I decided to do it is because I wanted to be as aggressive with this as possible, and I hope to never be in this situation again. So for me, whatever they recommended, I really felt was with reason, and I wanted to move ahead in that manner. It's also important to note that typically doctors try, especially if you're having multiple therapies within your entire treatment course, they try and have these therapies happen within 4 to 6 weeks of each other. That's simply because they want to make sure that you're getting the maximum benefit out of the previous therapy and also the maximum benefit out of the following therapy, and so that they don't things don't start to revert in your body or leave you more susceptible to the treatments not being as effective as they could be. They decided to go very aggressive with what the treatment regimen would be. They put me on something called DDAC-T. And the layman's terms of that is that I was taking these dense doses of 3 different medications, chemotherapy medications, over the course of 16 weeks. And so the disclaimer here is that there's a lot of different ways you can take DDAC-T. I chose to take it over the 16-week regimen, which essentially had me doing an infusion every other week over the course of 16 weeks. They break it down into 2 phases, essentially. So the AC is the first phase. That would be the first 8 weeks, every other week an infusion. And then immediately following that would be the T, or the taxol, which would be the second 8 weeks, every other week the infusion. And so that whole thing really served as the entire chemotherapy treatment for me. Here are 3 things I did to prepare for the chemotherapy journey. I went to the dentist and I got a checkup. As a side, one of the recommendations that they gave me was for the toothpaste I choose to use, make sure I'm using just a plain basic toothpaste with fluoride, not anything with the lightening or anti-cavity or anything like that, simply because some of those ingredients are known to interfere a little bit with chemo. I got a procedure to install a port in my body. It is really an easy or a more accessible way to access your veins so that they can input and inject the infusion and medication, and they can also draw blood to do a lot of blood work. Throughout the course of chemotherapy, at every infusion point, you're getting poked multiple times, so it definitely helps to have a port. And the third thing I did was have an echo. And an echo is essentially an ultrasound of your heart. The side effects of AC, at least for my chemo regimen, did have impacts to your heart function potentially. So they wanted to make sure they established a baseline first before I started on AC, just to make sure that they could understand if there was any damage done. And if there was, really what is the course forward from that point. I would say between the 2 phases, this was definitely the quicker of the 2. End to end, I would say it took about 4 hours on an infusion day to actually go through that process. Sometimes it took a little bit longer depending on, how they were flowing at the labs and getting all of the results back before they can give you the infusion. But basically, there's a ton of pre-testing that needs to happen to clear you for the infusion to happen. And that include everything from blood work, which they have a certain range of levels that they will accept for all the different things they test within your blood work. And they just want to make sure you're falling within those every infusion time frame. They also give you an IV. you get anti-nausea meds, a number of them, specifically for AC, not as much for the taxol, but with AC, nausea was a huge side effect. So in addition to all of the pre-meds that they give you that were anti-nausea, I also had some on prescription on standby at home in case I developed nausea after the infusion timeframe. Of course, you have the medication for the actual chemotherapy, and then after that, they gave me a device called Neulasta. It's something that went on my arm, and I believe within 12 hours after, or 24 hours after the infusion, the device went off, and it essentially injected this medication into your body, which helped to jumpstart your white blood cell count. Because as you're going through chemo, it's just, it's killing all of your cells, and then the goal is that you're growing back healthier cells. So this really, and other medications, depending on what your doctor recommends, there's a number of different things that can help essentially speed the process up. Despite all the fear and emotions I had going into that moment, the actual infusion itself was not a hard thing to overcome. I do remember distinctly there was a lot of tingling on the top of my head. But other than that, it was kind of a non-eventful experience, and I would say that was the case for every AC infusion that I had. Coming home, however, was a totally different story. That first day, that first infusion, I remember just being extremely fatigued. I got home, I believe I went straight to bed, and the fatigue that I had over the course of that first phase of chemo was unlike any fatigue I've ever experienced before. I could easily sleep for 10 hours and wake up and be completely exhausted. And again, that's just because all the cells in your body are being killed off, and with the hope that they will regenerate in a more healthy way. And it just takes a lot out of you. It's a completely taxing experience. Phase 1 of chemo brought a lot of different symptoms for me. I'm going to attempt to run through these in chronological order. So to start, I already mentioned fatigue. That was something that basically hit me as soon as I was done with infusion number 1, and it's something that compounded over time with every single infusion that I had after that point. Some point between infusion 1 and 2, I began to notice these dark purple splotches on my tongue, on the palms of my hand, and on the soles of my feet. And for these different body parts, I had a different experience with what that actually meant. And so with my mouth, it was really my ability to taste things and for them to taste good. Everything had this I've heard it described as a metallic taste. I'm not really sure I would describe it as that, but I also don't know how else to describe it. But I've never in my life experienced eating something that I know and love, like an apple, and it just tasting completely disgusting and spitting it out. At that point, the only thing that I could really eat that I was able to tolerate was pho. And it has a level of nutritional value as well. So just being able to have something that was a liquid, that had vegetables in it, that was chicken-based, essentially chicken soup, it was kind of a game changer for me, because everything else from the protein drinks that the doctors were recommending to, the vegetables, to all the other things I would normally have, I just couldn't stomach. At that point, I started losing weight. Overall, throughout the course of this, I lost probably about 20 pounds. And my mouth started getting really dry. There is something that they recommend for that called magic mouthwash, but I actually didn't take it because I found that the dryness factor of my mouth kind of ebbed and flowed throughout, and it wasn't so terrible at any given point that I felt that I needed to have something and add one more thing to the list of medications and stuff that I was taking. So I opted not to do it, but it might not be the case for everyone, because everybody's journey is very unique to their body. With the palms of my hands and the soles of my feet, my skin got very, very tough. And it even on my hands started turning kind of like this bronzy tannish color with those purple splotches. And for both instances, on my feet and my hands, my skin got extremely dry. I was using a lot of Aquaphor at that point in time, and it was helping a little bit, but it even didn't, completely help. But I was doing what I could to try and keep my hands as moisturized as possible. to essentially just like hold the fort until this passed. And it did eventually. You know, I feel like my hands, from like a thickness standpoint of like my skin, it's smoothed out. I definitely don't have the level of dryness that I did before, but while I was in it, it just took a lot to really, you know, figure out my way out of it. At some point after my second infusion, that's when I started to have some vision problems. And I noticed it more than anything when I was driving. Luckily, I work remote. I was on leave at that point, so it doesn't even matter. But the most driving I was doing was probably just picking up my girls from daycare or something like that. So I wasn't doing any extensive driving. But when I was driving, I was seeing, you know, double and triple vision. You know, I'm looking at a stoplight. I know that there's only one there because I'm used to the road, but I would see like 2 and 3 of them. So I learned later that that's because part of your cornea dries out. They do have eye drops for that. So that is something to consider if that does happen, you know, with your journey. But for me, that was when I started really seeing that this was like a full body impact and not just, you know, something isolated, if you will. Around that time also, I would say day 18 to be exact, that's when my hair started coming out. So I'm gonna backtrack about this hair journey for me because I proactively, I would say after a week after my first infusion, I made the decision to cut my hair. My hair was longer at that point, and I didn't want to experience the drastic and jarring moment of waking up and seeing all of your hair on a pillow. And I know that a lot of people have gone through that, just, you know, from the forums and groups I'm a part of and people I've spoken to. I wanted something that was maybe a little bit more of a smoother transition. So I opted to cut my hair down short as I could. And then essentially I let it stay that way until it started to fall out. Eventually I went completely bald. I don't think there's any way around that with the type of chemo that I had. That was just a given. You know, your hair is gonna fall out, period, get used to it. For me, I would say around day 18, I distinctly remember one night I was sitting on the couch with my husband. I was just absentmindedly, like just picking my hair, playing with it, and it just started to come out like by the clumps. And sure enough, in the days following, I would wake up and I would see little pieces of hair on my pillow. If I'm in the shower and I took like my wash rag and I just like went like that, it would just literally, like hair would just start coming out. So that started on day 18. That was when there was a short transition time where the hair, you know, started coming out. I think I did try and buzz it one more time or get it as close as I possibly could one more time. But overall, it was relatively a smooth transition. And I was actually lucky because I discovered through this process that I didn't hate the way I looked with short hair. So, you know, this might actually be, if there is any silver lining here, this might be something that I can play with and experiment with, you know, a little bit as my hair grows back. Some point shortly after that, I would say maybe even around the same time, that's when I began to notice that other hair on my body I was losing as well. And that included my armpit hair as well as everything below my waist. So overall, as I kind of mentioned before around the fatigue, AC, this phase 1, it's just a complete wipeout. That's how I felt. I felt like every pocket of energy I had was just taken from me. And it was definitely, I would say, a mental battle. This entire process was a mental battle because you really are going through these moments where you're just feeling at your absolute worst for so many reasons. And you have to keep on showing up to these infusions knowing that you're going to feel even worse. Add on top of that, for me personally, I had 2 little babies. You know, at that point, I had a not even 1-year-old and I had like probably a 2.5-year-old going on 3. So, you know, there was definitely a lot to that I wanted to be present for that I just don't feel that I was able to. I am grateful for the support that I had at that point because I know that there was definitely days where I was just not able to show up for my kids at all. And I can't imagine what I would be doing on this journey if I didn't have support to really step in and help out at those moments.
Stay tuned for part 2 of my chemotherapy story.